The next example is flipping 2 coins, and I'm going to show you a way to do this, to draw out when you only have 2 possible outcomes. Alright, so when we have flipping 2 coins, right, there are 2 possible outcomes for each coin, but we're going to flip 2 of them. So we have our first coin and our second coin. There are 2 outcomes on the first and 2 outcomes on the second. So there will be 4 total outcomes. And when we want to list them, when there are only 2, I'm going to set up what's called a decision tree. And I'm actually going to draw it down here at the bottom so I have a little more room. Alright, so I'm going to use what's called a decision tree. I can't spit that out. With branches. So the branch means I branch out each outcome. So I've got my coin 1 and my coin 2, and then I'm going to have my list of all outcomes, which we already know there's 4. Alright, so coin 1. So we set a branch. Coin 1 had 2 possible outcomes. I'm going to let H be heads and T be tails. Right? That's it. Coin 1. Heads or tails. Coin 2 also has 2 possible ones, but it matters what happened on coin 1. So suppose coin 1 had heads. Coin 2 then would have heads or tails as well. Or what if the other outcome happened on the first coin? Well, then you go branch out. So this is what we use by a tree to kind of show you all the possible outcomes. And so we could have the first possible outcome would be heads on the first, heads on the second. So you get heads on both. Or you could get heads on the first, tails on the second, or tails on the first, heads on the second, or tails on both. And so there is all 4 possible outcomes. And sometimes that's helpful so that we know how many different ways this can happen. And the reason why it's important is because a lot of times they'll miss the 2 middle ones. They'll say, well, 1 head and 1 tail. But it's a different outcome when you got heads on the first coin than when you get tails on the second coin. Than it is if you flip that around and say tails on the first, heads on the second. Those are 2 different outcomes because you have 2 different coins. It's a different chance. It's a different outcome. Alright, so there are my 4 outcomes when we flip 2 coins. Right? We have our 4 outcomes. So I listed my tree, 4 total. And so find the following probability. Well, what's the chance of flipping 2 tails? Well, that would be the tails outcome. If you go look at my tree, that's 1 of the 4 possibilities. So 1 out of 4, which is 0.25, or 25% chance. All right, you have a 25% chance of getting 2 tails when you flip a fair coin twice. Alright, flipping a head on the first coin and a tail on the second coin. Well, that's again also one of my outcomes. That's this outcome. Head on the first toss, tail on the second. So that also has the probability heads, then tails. Well, that was one of my 4 outcomes. Again, same as this one. 25% chance. Alright, the last one's where it's a little different. Head and 1 tail. Now this time it didn't tell me which one flipped a head and which one flipped a tail. So I could have heads on the first toss, or I could have heads on the second toss. And so remember, there were 2 outcomes. The probability you get 1 head and 1 tail. Well, you could have head on the first, tail on the second, or tail on the first, heads on the second. Alright, I have 1 heads and 1 tail. That would be both of these middle outcomes where you get 1 of each outcome. 1 head and 1 tail. And so there are 2 possibilities out of the 4 outcomes. So 2 out of 4, which is 1/2, 0.5, or 50%. We're writing it all out. That looks like 30%. 50%. Alright, so you have a 50% chance of flipping heads, 1 head and 1 tail. And again, it should make sense that's the case, right? There's a 50% chance of getting heads and a 50% chance of getting tails. So again, hopefully that makes sense. So flipping 2 fair coins. Alright, so I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to pick up the next. Again, I'm just going to keep these simple and short in case you want to come back and look at the individual outcomes. And so there's the example of flipping 2 coins.